Russell Doré on America's Classiest Cars.
My name is Russ Doré. I have presentations on a lot of the different automotive pioneers, which I'll talk about a little bit later. You know, I kind of went through the Henry Ford and the Walter Chrysler and the Billy Durant and the Dodge Brothers, and the one I gave here last year was Studebaker, Packard, Nash, and Hudson, the four that didn't quite make it into the big three but were really strong companies. Well, then I thought, well, you know, where am I going to go next? Because I really want American cars. And so I started to look around, and I found that there were four very classy cars made in America that I didn't realize were made in America by Americans. AUBURN, CORD, Duesenberg, and Stutz. And I always thought of them as European cars. And we'll talk about where they came from and how they developed and where they went. So let's look first at the Auburn Automobile Company, AAC. Well, this began as the ECKHART Buggy Company in Auburn, Indiana in 1874. It was founded by Charles Eckert. Their sons, his sons Frank and Morris took over when Charles retired, and in 1903 started the Auburn Automobile Company. Now this was the same year that Henry Ford started his company which exists today, the Ford Motor Company, after two failures, but that's a whole nother story. So maybe sometime we'll bring you the story of Henry Ford. Auburn sold about 50 of their 1903 runabouts. By 1905, they had built a two-cylinder touring car. This 1912 touring car had a six-cylinder engine. The company was modestly successful. During World War I, though, materials were getting harder to get for the smaller companies. And so the company was closed down in 1918 due to lack of product and sales. So the Eckert brothers sold to a group of Chicago investors headed by Ralph Austin Baird, who later served as Undersecretary of the Navy under Presidents Roosevelt and Truman. Investors also included William Wrigley Jr. of Wrigley Chewing Gum. Well, they decided they wanted to appeal more to women, so they implemented the Beauty 6 line in 1919 to appeal more to women. This is a Beauty 6 Roadster. This line continued for several years. This is a six-cylinder vehicle, was competing with the Ford Model T. It was priced at $1695, while the Model T, in black only with a four-cylinder engine, was selling for about $800. So you had to really want the Beauty to move up to that. Here's a 1920 touring model, an ad for it. Well, let's talk now about another innovative person, E.L. Cord. Eric Loban Cord. Well, he started as a salesman for the Moon Automobile Company in Chicago, and he rose to general manager. The Auburn Chicago investors wanted out of Auburn because their company was failing due to the post-war recession of 1921 and 1922. Now, Cord made him an offer, which they agreed to. It was a leveraged buyout. They had 600 unsold cars and parts for another 600. And Cord said, how about if I sell all those 600 cars and then sell the inventory and give you back all the money you initially invested with interest? Would you like that? They wanted out, right? They said, sure. And he said, and then the company's mine. And they said, sure. And he did it without any investment. So he took over. In 1925, he introduced the 666 with revolutionary color schemes to display at the New York Auto Show. By November of 1925, ACC had paid back the Chicago investors for their initial investment plus interest. So in February of 1926, E.L. Cord took over the total control of the company as president. He was 31 years old. This car is displayed at the Auburn Cord Duesenberg Museum in Auburn, Indiana, and we'll talk a little more about that. So E.L. Cord realized that 8-cylinder engines could only be found in the most expensive cars of the time, but he knew that the Lycoming manufacturing company in Pennsylvania sold an 8-cylinder engine for slightly more than a 6-cylinder. So he began offering 8-cylinder cars, such as this 1927 model 877, the lowest priced 8-cylinder car in America. Cord eventually purchased the Lycoming engine company. Now, in those days, for a while, the numbers often represented the cylinders, 8 cylinders, and the second number was the top speed. Now, that changed later on, but at some point, so this probably was an 8-cylinder that had a top speed of 77 miles an hour. Certified, of course. So they continued to develop new Auburn brand models, such as this 1926 888 Brougham. They offered this 898 BOATTAIL Speedster. Isn't that a beauty? Here's the 1933 Auburn Salon sedan. Here's a 36 Auburn, which is an elongated version of the 34 model. This is at the Stahls Automobile Collection, a private collection in Chesterfield, Michigan, near New Baltimore. Anybody been to the Stahls Museum? It's a wonderful little museum, great. It's free, it's open every Tuesday from 1 to 4, and the first Saturday of the month, 11 to 4. It's free, donations are accepted. And they also have quite a collection of pipe organs and so forth. So go on the website, STAHLS. It's a fun few hours to visit. And beautiful cars.
Where is it again?
New Baltimore, north of Detroit. So here's a 36 Auburn 852 BOATTAIL Speedster. This was produced in 36 and 37. Again, featured an 8-cylinder engine. Developed 150 horsepower with a supercharger. It reached speeds over 100 miles an hour. It was priced at $2,245. In those days, that was a lot of money. It is considered the premier American sports car of the 30s. Here's a rear view of BOATTAIL. And here's another color scheme in the same car. Here's a 36 Speedster ad. Notice that it says 100 miles an hour or more, certified. So I don't know what the process was of getting it certified, but they did. So let's jump back to 1929. Auburn introduced a new line of cars bearing the Cord name, since Cord owned the company. So their first model was this L29 Phaeton, the first American front-wheel drive production car. The front-wheel design eliminated the drive shaft, allowing the car to sit lower to the ground. Cord was the only production front-wheel drive car in America for 3 decades. Here's a 29 Cord L29 Brougham, which sold for $3,000 new. Powered by a Lycoming 8-cylinder engine, had a top speed of 80 miles an hour. This is at the Tampa Auto Museum in Florida, which is actually in the St. Petersburg, Clearwater area. So it's a wonderful museum. Started by a businessman in the area who was born in France and started collecting vintage cars. And it features foreign and domestic cars. And he collects one each of which has some achievement that made it an important part of the evolution of the automobile. So again, that's a nice museum, and you see I got a shirt there. So. Here's a 31 Cord back at the Auburn Museum. 35 SuperSpeedster Cord. 36 Cabriolet, which basically meant convertible. Here's a unique car. This 36 Cord hardtop 810 has been called the single most beautiful car in America by Forbes American Heritage magazine, primarily due to its unique gray-green iridescent color. And it's in the Auburn Museum. Here's the convertible 810. The 810s featured the coffin nose front-wheel drive. They were designed by Gordon Burig and became one of the most iconic classic cars. Its retractable headlights were a first in the industry. Again, here's a 37-cord Beverly 812 with a supercharger, again at the Tampa Bay Auto Museum. Now, some of you that were here earlier, I asked you what this little model vehicle is that I had here. And we had a lot of interesting answers, some very close. But we had a first time in all the times I've given this presentation, we had a gentleman who knew exactly what it was. So would you tell us before I reveal it, sir? What is it?
The vehicle from Nicolas Coupe from France, I think in 1707.
And what is the significance of it?
The first vehicle, first functional vehicle.
First self-propelled vehicle ever.
In the 1700s?
Yeah, yeah. There's a full-scale model of it in a replica in 1770, demonstrated pulling an artillery cannon. Oh, no, this is the original. I'm sorry, the original has been in the Conservatory of Arts and Trades in Paris since 1801. But it was built in 1770. And the model that I have, I got because in the Tampa Bay Museum there's a replica, full-size replica. It would go from where I'm standing to that wall. It is very large. Yeah, and so it is the first self-propelled vehicle ever. And it's interesting because it was built in 1770, and the first practical automobile everyone attributes to Carl Benz in 1885. So it took 115 years to go from this concept that ran by itself, you know, self-propelled. That's a steam, this generates steam here and runs two great big pistons, which drives the drive wheel here. And it works. I mean, in fact, the replica ran, the one in Tampa. So, but 115 years to go from the concept to one that was practical and could be produced in enough numbers to say we now have, you know, a vehicle that really works in the world. So anyway, has nothing to do with my other cars, but because it was at that museum, I had to throw it in. And it's interesting because the fellow there that sold me this in the gift shop, he said there are only two places in the world you can buy this model. One is at the museum in Paris, and one is here at my museum in Tampa. He said every time he gets low on them, he contacts the guy in Paris, and when he puts in his next order, if this guy in Tampa wants 100, he just throws 100 in with his order and sends them to the fellow in Tampa. So again, it's even the model is rare. So let's get back to the cars. This is a 37-cord 812 at the Ford Museum, Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, and this was during the Hoods Open era. Every year they have a week or so where they open up the hoods. I happened to be there, and I wanted to get this particular car. So that's the Auburn and the Cord. Now let's look at another pioneering automobile company around the same time, Duesenberg. Again, I always thought this was, you know, a German company and a German car and started in Germany, but no. Duesenberg family was a German-American family in St. Paul, Minnesota. This picture with Fred and August in the middle was taken around 1886. The brothers were self-taught engineers who hand-built race cars and race engines in Minneapolis. They then built aircraft engines for the Army Air Service during World War I in Minneapolis and Elizabeth, New Jersey. Fred on the right was chief engineer and Augie was his assistant. In 1921, an American driver, Jimmy Murphy, won the French Grand Prix in a Duesenberg race car. This was the first time an American had ever won the race. Their cars eventually won 3 Indianapolis 500 races. So they formed the Duesenberg Automobile and Motors Corporation in 1920. Their first model was a Model A, kind of after Henry Ford. First passenger car was introduced in 1920, produced in Indianapolis, Indiana. First production car with a straight 8 engine and hydraulic brakes. Well-known customers were cowboy star Tom Mix and actor Rudolph Valentino. Only us gray-haired people remember those names, but you know, you can read about them, the rest of you. Here's a 23 Model A. Well, Duesenberg was not a business success, and by 1925 was in trouble. Well, ECKHART, remember him, the entrepreneur? He's always looking for an opportunity, so he said, maybe I can acquire this company and get the talents of Fred Duesenberg. So he bought it in 1926. Then he challenged Fred Duesenberg to build the world's most beautiful automobile. In 1928, they introduced the Model J, which many think achieved their goal. The saying, "It's a doozy," came to refer to anything that was considered tops in its field. It's interesting because here's a 28 Duesenberg Model J. No two Model Js were exactly alike. That's because each body was hand-built by several different custom coach companies. So they would take the chassis and the engine, and then these custom coach companies around the country would build them. They built only 481 Model Js between 1928 and 1935. Now this is a 29 Duesenberg at the Gilmore Car Museum near Kalamazoo. How many of you have been to that museum? That is a wonderful museum. It's probably an hour and a half from here at the most, and it's this side of Kalamazoo off of 94. And it has 400 cars, one of the largest car museums in the country. Has about 10 different buildings. It has a Classic Car Club of America building, a Pierce Arrow building, a Franklin building, a Model A building, a Cadillac LaSalle Museum, and a Lincoln Museum. They opened the Model A Museum 2 or 3 years ago, and they patterned it after a Ford dealership of that period, the Model A and then 29. And they expected 500 Model A owners to show up with their cars, and they had 1,000 there at Gilmore. I was there that day. I was actually portraying Henry Ford for a little group. So the Model J was the most powerful and fastest American car. The engine developed around 200 horsepower. Top speed was 116 miles an hour. Cost was about $17,000, which is about $200,000 today. Now, let's look at what they're doing these days. Here's a 30 Model J Victoria Coupe. Isn't that a beauty? That sold at auction for $902,000 fairly recently. You think that's a lot of money? This 31 Model J with body by Murphy sold for $3,500,000. And how much do you think this 31 Model J sold for in 2012? Anybody? How much? Oh, come on. Pardon? $5 million. Anybody? Going? Anybody? Come on, take a guess. Anybody? What was that? 2 million? 5 million? How about 10.34 million?
Oh my God.
Huh? Well, the stars like the Model J. So Gary Cooper owned this 1931 Model J Tourster with a body built by Durham Body Works of Pennsylvania. Here's a color photo of the car. This is what it actually looks like in color, taken at the Heritage Museum and Gardens in the town of Sandwich on Cape Cod. Now here's an interesting story. Cooper also owned this 1935 short wheelbase SSJ, supercharged straight 8 engine, rated at 400 horsepower, with a top speed of more than 130 miles an hour. How'd you like to go 130 miles an hour in that, huh? Well, meanwhile, his friend Clark Gable owned a 35 model JN convertible. Well, Gable saw Cooper's car and he said, I like that with all the pipes and stuff on it. So he wanted his rebuilt like an SSJ, and so he had it rebuilt with the pipes and everything on it. There's a story here of Clark Gable and Carol Lombard. These two stars had worked together in a film called No Man of Her Own. At that time, she was married to actor William Powell, whom she divorced a couple of years later. Well, Gable and Lombard reconnected at something called the White Mayfair Ball in Hollywood, I guess, in 1936. He took her for a ride in his new convertible. That was the beginning of a scandalous affair. Gable was married at the time, but was seen traveling around town with Lombard in the Duesenberg. So eventually, Gable divorced his wife and married Lombard. They took the Duesenberg on a belated honeymoon trip up the California coast and on to Vancouver, British Columbia. Unfortunately, Lombard was killed in an airplane crash several months later. So Gable instructed an agent to sell the Duesenberg with the provision that he never see it again. And he never did. Well, the car then changed hands several times, more than a dozen times, and was rebuilt and repainted at least 4 times. When I was doing my research, I couldn't believe it. I kept seeing, this is the Clark Gable SSJ. And then I'd see another one. This is the Gable Duesenberg. And I'd see another one. And then I found out later, the pictures, found out later that it was repainted at least 4 times. So it was all the same car I was seeing. And all of a sudden it made sense. So here's one version. And then in 2006, a new owner said, no, I want to take it back to the original condition, the way it was. And so he's restored it to back when Gable first bought it. Also, Ginger Rogers owned this 29 Duesenberg Model J. Its body by Murphy featured the first disappearing top. The top kind of folded back into the bodywork instead of just laying on top as the earlier convertibles did. Well, this was featured in a 1933 musical movie with Fred Astaire called The Gay Divorcee. Here's a scene from the movie with Fred, Ginger, and the Duesy. I was looking through Turner Classical Film list the other night, and there it was. So we recorded it and watched it the other night. And there's quite a race scene in there where he's chasing her. She's driving the Duesenberg and he's driving an MG. And they're having quite a chase scene through the woods. So, you know, if you can go into Turner sometime, I'm sure they replay those things. It's kind of a hoot. Jay Leno, you've heard of him. Well, he found this 27 Duesenberg Model X in a garage. Needs a little work, right? Well, he restored it, and here's the restored. All it takes is money, you know. All it takes is money. And here's a picture of him with his, no, there's the restoration from another angle. And here's a view of him with the car. So who is this? Jay Leno and Dave Doré. Well, you'll have to humor me a little bit. This is my son, Dave. Graduated Northville High School class of '85, who produces promos for films and television. And in a few years ago, remember Jay Leno went to the 10 o'clock slot? And he was driving a sports car along the Malibu coast. Well, my son Dave directed that shoot. And here they are. They made a stop during the shoot. And it's my son Dave and Jay.
Is Jay Leno's car collection available for viewing?
No, it isn't. It isn't. Yeah, it's. I mean, if you know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, but do any of you ever watch the Jay Leno's Garage television program? Is it running again? they're showing reruns, but it's a great program, and he has so much fun with it, and he invites stars and friends like, what's his buddy from Michigan, Tim Allen, and they race some of these old cars and things. But it's a fun show, so even reruns, if you can find Jay Leno's Garage, it's a lot of fun. Well, sorry about the personal stuff, just being a proud father. So enough of the movie stars. Let's go back and pick up the Duesenberg line where we left off. So in 31, this one again is on display at the Henry Ford Museum, and it was on the Hoods Up day. Here's a convertible made by Murphy Body Works in 1932. It has a pointed torpedo back. Now this one belonged to oil millionaire J. Paul Getty and author John O'Hare and Cliff Durant, son of the GM founder Billy Durant. Cliff Durant supposedly sold it for $400, or $400,000, I'm sorry, to pay for his $400,000 divorce. And this is displayed at the Auburn Cord Duesenberg Museum. So this Duesenberg ad shows no car, but implies the wealthy polo set drives them. Also had a Cord ad back on the table here, and there are some brochures back here on the Motor Cities National Heritage Area that I'll mention too that you can have. But you can't have my poster. You can have the... Well, E.L. Cord again, 33, he bought the controlling interest in the Checker Manufacturing Company down the road in Kalamazoo. They were using the 8-cylinder Lycoming engines again that were used in the Cords. He sold Checker in 1936. Also, I live in Northville, and we have a little history there. Cord purchased the Stinson Aircraft Company of Northville from a fellow named Eddie Stinson. And Cord went on to form the Century Airlines. So he had an airline, and then he had the Stinson Aircraft Company, and he bought his planes for the airline from his company, right? So he bought 100 Stinson trimotor planes from his own Stinson company. Well, then in 1932, the company called the Aviation Corporation bought Century, bought Cord's company, but they were the holding company for American Airways. Well, Cord didn't like that, so he quietly bought Aviation Corporation stock and took over control of Aviation Corporation, which had bought him out. Aviation Corporation eventually became American Airlines. So I like to think without Eddie Stinson in Northville, maybe there would be no American Airlines. Oh, and there's also, it's a whole nother story. I've got a thing on aviation pioneers, but there's a Stinson aircraft hanging in the museum, in the Ford Museum. Well, Cord's wife, Helen, had passed away from cancer in 1930 at age 37. 4 months later, he married 25-year-old Virginia, the sister of a friend. She was known as Gigi. Cord made the cover of Time magazine in 1932 because of his growing holdings. They said his business empire went from the highways to the skyways. So he and his wife in 1933 built Cord Haven, a home in Beverly Hills, California with 16 bedrooms and 22 bathrooms. I'm not quite sure the ratio there, but I guess when you're going down the hall between bedrooms, if you can't make it, you need an extra bathroom. So he spent a little time in Auburn about this time and virtually ignored auto manufacturing. Well, he moved his family to England for a couple of years. Some people speculated that he was afraid of his baby daughter being kidnapped, as it happened to Charles Lindbergh's child. Then he moved back a couple years later to LA and sold the Cord Corporation in 1937. He then moved out west and speculated in mines, real estate, broadcasting stations, and oil wells. In 1956, he was appointed to a vacant seat in the Nevada State Senate. Here he is shown shaking hands with a young senator from Massachusetts, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Cord was asked by the Democratic Party to run for governor of Nevada in 1958, but he declined. He died of cancer in 1974 at age 79. Here's a statue of him outside the Cord Museum in Auburn. Now this museum is, how many of you have been there? Very good. It's a beautiful museum, and again, it's really not that far. What, a couple hours down the road, really, and south. And it's Art Deco in design, and this building was the showroom, the actual showroom for the cars in those days. So it's beautiful. And some of the cars that pictures I showed you, you could see Cord and Duesenberg on the window in the background. That's because it was the showroom for a sales showroom. And out in the parking lot are statues of the Duesenberg brothers, Fred and Augie. Well, let's look at our last classy company, Stutz. Well, the Stutz Motor Car Company was founded in 1913. It's founded by Harry Stutz as the Ideal Motor Car Company in 1911 in Indianapolis. He entered a car in the Indianapolis 500 that year and finished 11th, which was impressive for a new vehicle. He renamed it the Stutz Motor Car Company the next year and won the championship in 1913 and 1915. Here's a picture of a 1912 Stutz racer. Well, he sold a high-performance roadster, the Stutz Bearcat, had an underslung chassis, which greatly enhanced the safety in cornering. The engine was a 4-cylinder with 4 valves per cylinder. They have one like this at the Stahl Museum, incidentally, same color and everything. Well, the Bearcat was a favorite of the rich and famous, such as early film actor Robert Warwick. The fur coat and the Bearcat seemed made for each other. Here's John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara in a 1914 Bearcat. Warm weather, no fur coat needed. Here's Jay Leno again, this time with his 1918 Stutz Bearcat, which he drives. You notice it's getting kind of a little bigger as the models go on. It becomes a little more substantial. Stutz left the company in 1919 after falling out with major stockholders, and in 1922 it was taken over by 3 investors, included Charles Schwab, founder of the Schwab investment firm. This 2-door sedan was offered in 1927. An Indianapolis 500 racer, the Blackhawk, was developed in 1928. This 8-cylinder 4-door model was offered in 1931. Notice the side-mounted spare tire and the slanted windshield to give it a little more style. Here's the 28 Stutz ducktail model. Here's a 29 Stutz 4-passenger Speedster, body built by LeBaron Body Works. And again, they built bodies for Chrysler, they built bodies for many of the early manufacturers. You could take a Chrysler chassis and send it to LeBaron and get it made into a LeBaron body car. Here's a 1932 red Roadster. That's a beauty, isn't it? So the production of Stutz automobiles ended in 1935. However, in 1971, the name reappears. It was the company's name was reincarnated in 71 as the Stutz Motor Car Company of America. New York banker James O'Donnell joined forces with retired Chrysler stylist Virgil Exner to produce this new vehicle. They were able to use the Stutz name because the original company had been gone for 30 years and it was now public domain. So they didn't have to pay anything for the Stutz name. The spare tire protruded through the trunk lid. The car was built on a GM chassis with a GM engine. The initial factory price was $22,500 in 1971, which is over $125,000 today. They went up to $84,000 by 1981, which is over $200,000 today. The bodies were made by Ghia in Italy. The first Blackhawk was purchased by Elvis Presley. There he is taking ownership. And here he is. Somebody caught him driving his Black Hawk. Well, he bought 3 more. He really liked them, and he leased a couple of additional ones for friends. Many celebrities owned Black Hawks, including Sammy Davis Jr., Johnny Cash, Jerry Lewis, Muhammad Ali, Elton John, Paul McCartney, and the Shah of Iran. He had 12 of them. Now here's Dean Martin's. Notice the license plate. It says Drunky. And yes, he crashed it with that plate on it. So can't you imagine him saying to the police officer, "And why would you think I'd been drinking?" In 1979, they introduced a new Bearcat model. So they had the Black Hawk, and then they had the Bearcat. 79 Bearcat convertible, offered for $75,000 in 1979. Well, the new Stutz company lasted for over 20 years, with the last cars being made in 1995. So let's kind of summarize these 4 companies. AUBURN was the first of the American Classiest cars. ECKHART took over AUBURN, introduced the Cord. Then the Duesenberg brothers started their company, and AUBURN bought Duesenberg, added it to their lineup, and Harry Stutz built his first Stutz Motor Company. All were gone by 1937, victims of the Depression. Why did they fail and other companies didn't? Well, I think some of the reasons are that they weren't large enough to survive. So, for instance, other American luxury cars survived because they were part of a larger company. So, for instance, Cadillac, luxury car, but it was part of GM and it was carried by Chevrolet. Lincoln, again, a luxury car, was part of Ford and was carried by the Model A and the V8. So they made it through the Depression because they had the medium and lower priced cars to keep the company alive. These companies only made the top of the line, and that money was not available anymore. Packard also was a part of Studebaker, had merged with Studebaker, and so that was carried by Studebaker. So that's how that survived for a while. We often think of Rolls-Royce, which I didn't include because it's not an American car, but that had a very broad international market for many, many years and survived that. So as the economy rebounded in the 40s and 50s, celebrities and other wealthy people wanted fast cars based on currently successful race cars like Maserati, Ferrari, and Lamborghini. They didn't want the big cars with a lot of trim and a lot of glitz. So people stopped making those. So at one point, people would start saying to me when I first did some of these presentations, well, you know, what about American luxury cars? You know, these are classiest cars. The American companies had some classy cars. And although I started out with the idea that these were cars which we all thought were foreign cars, were American cars, I thought, well, I think we need to talk a little about the American classy cars. So what about the Detroit Three? It used to be called the Big Three. Now it's called the Detroit Three. Chrysler, Lincoln, and Cadillac. What about their classy cars? Well, Chrysler had an Imperial 80 in 1926. In 1931, they had this Imperial again with body by LeBaron. So they made bodies for Duesenberg and Chrysler. In 1958, Chrysler built this classy Imperial. Ford Motor Company had this 22 Lincoln. They purchased Lincoln from Henry Leland in 1922. Henry, said he didn't want anything to do with a luxury car. His whole idea was a car for every person. He kept bringing the price down, started the Model T at $850 with the assembly line and having 50% of the market share. He kept reducing the price down to $260 for the same car. So he wanted everybody to have a car, kind of created the middle class in many ways, because now as employees, you start paying them $5 a day, which about doubled their wages. So they could now afford to buy a car and became customers. But he didn't want anything to do with the luxury car. So his son Edsel built a home over in on Lake St. Clair, there we go, Lake St. Clair, and had a lot of fancy neighbors in Grosse Pointe, and they kept saying, we'd like to drive one of your company's cars, but you know, we really don't want to drive a Model T or a Model A. And so Leland company was failing, and so they bought it at auction. And I think Henry said to Edsel, hey, if it works, fine, you know, we'll both take the credit if it fails, you know, it's yours. but it made it, so that's how Lincoln got in. Well, Edsel, again, that was kind of his baby. So he had this car designed after traveling in Europe. It had a V12 engine, eventually had 125 horsepower, and was produced through 1948. It featured a spare tire mounted behind the trunk, which came to be the symbol of the Continental. Famed architect Frank Lloyd Wright called it the most beautiful car in the world. I was tooling around on the internet looking for pictures, and you could buy this, still buy this, I think. You could buy it last week at least for $100,000 right in Bloomfield Hills. But call right after the session because I might buy it tomorrow, so you got to move fast. But I jest, as they say. My wife is here, and she's giving me funny looks. She says, where am I going to live? Well, GM had its classy cars, too. Here's a 34 Buick convertible coupe with a body by Fisher, which was a division of GM, became a division of GM. This Cadillac Fleetwood was owned by Elvis Presley and is on exhibit at Graceland Museum. This 59 Cadillac Coupe de Ville featured huge tail fins. It was designed by famed GM designer Harley Earl. The tail fins were gradually reduced in size over the years, and the de Ville name was last used in 2005. How about the sporty ones? Recent classy American sports cars or sporty cars. Well, we recognize these names, don't we? Chevrolet Corvette, Ford Thunderbird, and the Ford Mustang. So the 53 Chevrolet Corvette, this is the first one coming down the assembly line. It was designed again by Harley Earl, had a revolutionary fiberglass body. It was a 6-cylinder engine with 3 carburetors, 150 horsepower, but had a 2-speed automatic transmission, no stick shift, because there was no manual transmission able to handle 150 horsepower, right? So later they did add a stick. In 1955, a V8 engine was introduced and a 3-speed manual transmission. The rest, as they say, is history, as the Corvette eventually became a leading American sports car. Well, not to be outdone, Ford introduced the 2-seater Thunderbird 2 years later. Featured a 212 horsepower V8 engine and a 3-speed manual transmission with an optional automatic transmission. It was not marketed as a sports car, as was a Corvette, but rather as a sporty personal car. 1958, it was turned into a 4-seater. This was the beginning of an automotive segment called the personal luxury car. And how about the Mustang? Ford introduced the Mustang in 1964. The prototype for this car was a 2-seater, but Lee Iacocca, who just passed away recently, was so impressed with the sales success of the 4-seater Thunderbird that he had a back seat added. The Mustang was marketed as a sporty car, but evolved into a real sports and race car. I had a 66 baby blue hardtop like this with a 6-cylinder engine, automatic. And the reason is that my wife and I had been driving a Triumph TR4 sports car, and our son David that I showed you later was born, and we had no place. The trunk in the TR4 wasn't big enough for the playpen. Remember? Playpens, it's kind of like what you call a pack and play a couple of years ago. So big clunky. So we had to get a family car. So the Mustang trunk was huge compared to the TR4, and the playpen fit in the back. So Iacocca was right, because the Mustang was Ford's most successful launch since the Model A in 1928. Over 10 million Mustangs have been sold thus far, and Mustang evolved into one of the leading American sports and racing cars. So America's not really designing classy cars anymore. As I said, most Americans who want upscale cars want more practical vehicles such as a Lincoln Navigator or a Cadillac Escalade. Modern celebrities who want exotic cars usually want fast foreign cars such as Ferrari, Lamborghini, or Maserati. Or if you just read the paper recently, the new Ford GT MK2, which your wealthy neighbors might be showing up in soon. It's a Le Mans race car with 650 horsepower with a passenger seat added. Now, it is not street legal. There are only 45 will be built, and you have to take them to a track to use. But for people who like to do that, you don't have to go and pay a lot of money to have a whole racing crew or something. You can take your own car. And for that privilege, you can buy one of these for $1.2 million. That's base price. There are a few little add-ons too. I want to talk about a couple of things. Motor City's National Heritage Area. Any of you familiar with that? Okay. This is, I'm on the board of directors for this. This is a part of the National Park Service, and there's some 50 National Heritage areas around the country for different fields, and ours is the only one for automobiles, motor vehicles. And there are some flyers back there on the table. But one of the nice things, you go on the internet, motorcities.org, and it's in the flyer back there, and you can sign up to get a article sent to you each week on automotive history. It's just a short little article, and you can also go into their archives and read past ones. So it's a fun thing. I look forward every week to getting mine. Also, I live in Northville, where we have the first of Henry Ford's village industries, which he had some 20 around the area in small towns, many with water wheels for power. And so if you've been to Northville, the building with the water wheel made all the valves for the Model T for years. And it's still there. It's not a Ford plant anymore. But out front is a sign about this wide and about this deep with the history. And Motor Cities produces those. So we've got some 100 or so around the state in front of various historic facilities talking about what happened there. And it's really neat. And within 2 or 3 months, as you drive into the Detroit area or the Flint area or anything into this automotive area, there will be a huge roadside sign that says you are now entering the Motor Cities National Heritage Area. So it's been a long struggle for our board to work that out with the highway department and all of the regulations, but it's all been approved and paid for, and it'll be kind of exciting. So that's kind of a neat organization. Here are some of the things that other presentations I do, PowerPoint presentations. I do one on Henry Ford, Billy Durant, founder of General Motors, Walter Chrysler, Studebaker, Packard, Nash, and Hudson, the Dodge brothers, their company and their lives. And then I kind of got the point again where I thought, how many more car companies are there that people want to turn out to see? And I had worked at Boeing for a few years back a ways. And so I decided to do one on aviation pioneers. So I have one on the Wright brothers, Bill Boeing, and Donald Douglas. They put America in the air, and that's a fun one. The ones after that are different. These are PowerPoints. These are interactive, where we have actors portraying these people. So we have people portraying Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, and Firestone. We have another one, Ford, Durant, and Chrysler. We have Franklin, Eleanor Roosevelt, Joe and Rose Kennedy, and Harry and Bess Truman. And our latest, Mark Twain. My hair is a little shaggy because tomorrow I'm going down into Indiana to be Mark Twain, along with my wife for a group. My stage wife, my actress wife. But the reason we did Joe and Rose Kennedy instead of JFK is he never got old enough, for me to play him. So we had to go up to another generation. But we talk a lot about the family and the kids, John and Bobby. Here's a picture of us with the Henry Ford on the left, Thomas Edison in the center, who bears a strange resemblance to me, and Harvey Firestone on the right. And we do an interactive thing where we answer questions from the audience, but I'll give you a hint. We pass out the questions. and we pretend they're theirs. But it gets people involved, and it makes you feel like you're back there. If we let people ask questions, you know, it'd be all over the place. You know, somebody'd say, well, my uncle used to have a farm next to Henry Ford. Do you remember what, you know, what his name was? No, I don't. I'm sorry. So that's what we do. I have a website, doreproductions.weebly.com, where I have my schedule. I'll be up here for a little while if you have any questions or comments. But thank you for your attention, and hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
This program was recorded on July 9th, 2019 at the Ann Arbor District Library.